resources. Amy, Anne, and John are just going to speak about their offices and their groups and the resources that are available to students. And then we'll get into more of the panel discussion where I will go through a series of questions and ask each of the panelists specific questions. So let's get started. Before we do, however, I just want to do the Treaty 7 Territory Land Acknowledgement. Oki, Amba, Westich, Danit, Ada, Tansi, hello. The Southern Alberta Institute of Technology acknowledges it is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which today encompasses the Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, and the homeland of the Northwest Métis. SAIT also recognizes all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And now I will pass it over to Amy to do a little introduction about women in trades and technology.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Amy Reeds. I'm an instructor here at SAIT for the AT program for the School of Construction. So I'm also on the EDI Advisory Council, but I'm actually here today to talk about WIT. So what is WIT, Women in Trades and Technology, and what do we do? So WIT's vision statement: we promote the recruitment, enrollment, and retention of women in trades and technology programs here at SAIT. And how do we do this? Our mission statement: WIT builds community by providing mentorship, awareness, and initiatives to promote and empower women navigating non-traditional careers in trades and technology. So ultimately, WIT aligns with SAIT in strategic plans, goals, and culture. So minus the title and the purple logo, members of WIT are of all genders, races, ages, and of all different career levels. So anyone can join. WIT is run by a board consisting of about 9 individuals, and I am the internal co-chair. We all work together to educate and assist to create community or networking experiences for the growth in trades and technology. So just a little update on what WIT has recently done. We've rolled out our spring mentorship program, which officially started in March. You can sign up for the next session, which is in this fall, and feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. So you can join WIT at any time. And also you can also email WIT at any time with any questions. So that's WIT, WITT @SAIT.ca. Thank you, Jose.
Perfect, thanks Amy. We'll pass it over to Anne Tran to speak about the Career Advancement Services Office.
So in Career Advancement Services, we have a team of career advisors who can help students and grads and alumni, no matter how long ago you graduated, with job search skills. So that can range from helping with resume and cover letter writing, to interview skills, to networking strategies. So all of our services can be accessed via our website, My Career Hub. So the URL is mycareerhub.sait.ca. And I'm happy to provide some information that can be shared afterwards. But yeah, through My Career Hub, there's an online job board. We have thousands of employers on there that are looking to hire great SAIT talent. And that's where you would book appointments as well with a career advisor for things like a practice interview or a LinkedIn profile review or resume review. I'm also on the Pride at SAIT committee, and so I work closely with John Partington, who we'll be hearing from shortly. So I do have a big passion for supporting students, especially our students from underrepresented groups. So anything that I can help with in that regard, I am here as well for that. Thanks.
Perfect, thanks Anne. And I will pass it over to John.
Sure, thanks Jose. Hi everyone, thanks for joining over your lunch hour. So my name is John Partington. I'm the Associate Director for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at SAIT. The function of my role is to find ways to make our campus a more inclusive place to work and study. So this is for students and for employees. The main way in which we do this through my office is by implementing SAIT's new 5-year Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion strategy. So this is an overarching institutional plan of all of the things we want to do to really shift our campus culture through incremental stages. This includes things like offering training and education opportunities for staff and students, For example, there are some LinkedIn Learning curated playlists you can take advantage of if you wanted to learn on your own at your own pace. We also have at least 8 different offerings, from intercultural communication to LGBT inclusion, that are offered face-to-face through 1-hour sessions that can be booked for your classroom or for your program at large. But it's also things like policy and procedure review, really digging into our hiring practices and making sure that our rich diversity is represented in the SAIT staff and leadership, and all these things in between. So lots of great things to unpack within the strategy itself, and a lot of it speaks to our conversation today. So I'm just here to provide a little bit of knowledge about what I know, and then listen to what students in ATSA are looking for.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. And now we'll pass it over to Brad, just to quickly introduce yourself, and then over to John from Clark Builders.
Great, thanks, Jose. So my name is Brad Regier, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Clark Builders. My connection to this is through many different avenues, but largely Amy Reeds was connected to Clark Builders, worked with us for a period of time that we've always stayed connected. Also sit on the BCMP PAC committee, or the advisory board. So I for me, I believe in supporting SAIT. I think that for us, the industry's responsible to continue to support our future leaders. So, but just in terms of background, I've spent, well, the last almost 20 years has been Clark Builders. Before that, I've been in several locations throughout North America over the past 30 plus years. And what that really has done for me and taught me is just how different the attitude towards equity, diversity, and inclusion is in different geographies. And it really actually, probably more than anything, to my benefit, forced me to recognize those differences and initiate change. And while we still have a lot of work to do, what applied in one market simply wasn't transferable to another. So the change started with me, and now part of my responsibility is to continue to move that change deeper into our industry. And the other note that I sort of put down as I prepared was, the diversity is really around what builds our future, around experience, culture, thinking, perspective. So for us as a business, it's just a part of who we are and who we need to be going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Brad. We'll pass it over to John to introduce himself.
Great. Thanks, Jose. Thanks, Brad. And yeah, thanks everybody for including Brad and I on this, and Clark Builders in the conversation. I was really excited to get the invite, and I'll explain a little bit more through my background. So I'm a NAIT grad, so I don't know what the relationship is with NAIT and SAIT these days, if that puts me in a good peer light or if it's competitive. I know at times that, yeah, there we go. I see a boo NAIT so in the chat. So and a former NAIT grad, really got into construction as an entrepreneur. Actually started my own business at a young age, had a lot of advantages in doing that, and about 15 years in, really just started to kind of have a bit of an awakening moment for myself that there's so much more that business could do to improve the quality of people's lives. And that kind of really became my defining sort of personal mission statement from then on. Was I felt like we sort of missed the mark sometimes, not just construction related, but perhaps capitalism related, or the structures that we've kind of brought to our economy. And, so call it a epiphany or an awakening moment where I left my existing business, and I was looking for a place that had that shared value and vision. And I found Clark Builders and the leadership team at Clark Builders being very much along the same lines of what I was looking to do. Is we have a great position in a really conventional industry, and that really impacts a lot of people's lives. So, a lot of people in construction, and so I said yes, and now I'm the Vice President of People and Wellness for Clark Builders. And so functionally, that means I have reporting responsibilities in HR and with safety, but really furthering that mission of improving the lives of people that come in contact with our organization, whether that's people that work for us or stakeholders that we're building with, the communities in the industry that we work with. So being here today really helps me further and live my mission. So I appreciate being included. And just quickly on our ED&I approach, that that strategy and department falls in under my purview with our HR department as well. So I'm sure I'll speak to that a little bit later.
Great, thank you very much, John. And we'll pass it over to David from Dialog.
David, you're on mute.
That doesn't help. So I forget what I may have said before, but I was just saying that my spelling of my name, there's a C at the end of it, but that's okay. I've been with Dialog for over 20 years now, and I am also a NAIT grad, so I share that with John. So don't hold that against me. I've been in Calgary now here for over 20 years. Moved here in 1996. So it's been a long time, and with Dialog, like I said, over 20 years. And I've been a resource manager for Dialog for around 15 years, just kind of fell into that category. It wasn't something necessarily that I was looking for, but I was asked to do that as a resource manager and have been there ever since. So I don't know where we want to go with this. Are we going to talk about hiring and stuff like that later, Jose?
Yeah, we can get into that. These are just introductions on
Okay.
yourself and your experience with equity, diversity, and inclusion.
We can talk a little bit more about that when we get into hiring.
Perfect. And then we'll pass it over to Crystal.
Hello, I'm Crystal Fifield. I am the Human Resources Manager at Dialog. And I just kind of organically became the champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Dialog. There was no actual formal event or a job posting. It's just something I've always been passionate about, and I brought it to work every day, I guess. I've always been an advocate for women in leadership positions ever since I can remember. I grew up in a home with 2 boys, and out of the 3 of us, I was the one that inherited my father's work ethic. And as I got older, I realized that the opportunities presented to me didn't come as easily to me as they did to him. And then, of course, as I worked through 20 years of being in male-dominated industries, I've worked in policing and oil and gas, construction. It's all kind of influenced that passion for women in leadership. But on top of that, in terms of diversifying the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, I lived in very isolated northern towns in Northwest Territories and northern Quebec in a region called Kativik for many, many years. And that experience really drew my attention to the human experience and how it's different for everyone. And that the human experience for me as a white woman is much different than the experience of an Indigenous woman, for example. So these are ideas that I've been exploring over the last 20, 25 years, and ways that I can become an ally at work and outside of work, and how I can help make the world a better place where all feel valued and included and can be their true selves. Yeah, so I'm happy that David and I are here and have this opportunity to represent Dialog and discuss these important topics with you.
Thank you very much, Crystal and David. And David, my apologies for the misspelled name there. I apologize for that.
I shouldn't even have brought it up. I apologize for that.
No worries at all. But now we can sort of get into the specific panel questions. The way I kind of laid out my slides here is you'll see the question, and below the question, you'll see who that question is addressed to. The folks from Dialog and Clark. You will be getting some of the similar questions, but with Anne and John, who have a little different expertise, you'll get a little bit different, but we can get started. So the first question, and this one's for John Partington, as well as the industry panelist. What does equity, diversity, and inclusion mean to you? And what does it look like? I think some of you already touched on that in your introductions, but maybe I'll ask John to maybe get us started here. John Partington.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. It's definitely important to define your terms when you start out on culture change in this space. So I'm glad we're starting with some terminology. I mean, if we want to start with diversity, this is definitely about the similarities and differences that we share as human beings. So it's our unique experiences, our identities, our perspectives. Some of these things are visible, but many of these things are invisible. So for example, one's gender, their race, their sexual orientation, their class, but it's also about their diversity of thought, their point of view, their research interests, how they go about problem solving, all of these kinds of things. Inclusion is a feeling. So it's not so much something you can see, but it's something that you feel. It's when you feel welcome, respected, and that you belong. You can be your authentic self openly at work or in the classroom. Equity is a tricky one. Equity is about fairness. So it's about making sure everyone has a fair right to access, participate, and be successful. It's not treating everyone the same. That's what equality is. So there is a nuance there that's important to distinguish. What can it look like? I mean, you can see diversity in the sense of those visible markers. You know, you'll see a bunch of different bodies in a shared space, but it's more about how those folks feel. Do they feel welcome, included, and that they belong? If they do, they have higher levels of engagement and satisfaction, among many other things, which allows them to, you know, focus on their studies or really excel at their work. There's a summary for me anyway.
Great answer. Thank you very much, John. And then maybe we could start with the folks from Clark Builders and move over to the Dialog team.
I'm happy to start. Brad and I are in so many meetings together, and we usually have that, Jose, where it's like, is it John or is it Brad? So I'll take the reins. Yeah, I would like to echo what I heard from John, and maybe share a couple of things that has really been an acceleration of the journey for us in this regard. So we use some guiding questions that might be helpful on the back of what John shared as far as the terminology and the definition. So for diversity, we proposition it, can I see myself in the room? So, you know, for us, we have a vision that our organization will look like the communities that we build with and for. And so can people see themselves in our organization and see that they fit there? And then a nice segue to the feeling part, the equity part. We use the guiding question of, do I have access, opportunity, and support in the room? And that really ties in with what John was saying. That's a feeling aspect. Am I psychologically safe? Am I supported? Are the systems, does this organization have the systems that are working against me or working for me? And then lastly, on inclusion, can I be myself in the room? And I heard that authenticity piece. Is it safe to be me? And so we use those kind of as our guiding lens on those three topics. And maybe lastly, because I'm not sure if there's another part, I'll just add the statement of solidarity that we first published within this last year, and as another guiding principle for us. And I know it might be out of place, but I'll just share it. We commit and ask each of you to commit to creating, this is an internal statement of solidarity, each of you to commit to creating an inclusive environment and provide a safe place where each of our colleagues can be their authentic selves. We commit to reviewing every aspect of our business through the lens of equity and make any needed changes in our company. We will work in order to maintain an atmosphere of mutual respect, understanding, and dignity within the workplace. And we published that back in June of 2020. Brad, over to you, Brad.
Actually, I was defaulting to you because I think you said it far more eloquently. You know, one of the things that I would add to that would really be around being consistent in our anti-racism zero tolerance, as well as being consistent in how we address unacceptable behavior. And I think that as a business, and particularly as leaders, it's critically important that we establish a consistency, but we established expectations that there's just simply no room for this in our business. So that's the only piece that I would add. I think John articulated that quite well.
Thank you very much, John and Brad. And then we'll go over to Crystal and David from Dialog.
I'll let Crystal take the lead on this.
Yeah, I mean, everything that everyone has said so far definitely applies. The only thing that I would add from a dialogue perspective is bringing inclusion and diversity into our design and designing for people who will use spaces. And so it's incredibly important that we have that diversity of thought around the table, that we have various lived experiences around the table when we're designing spaces that will be used by diverse people with diverse needs. And yeah, that's the only thing that I would add to that. David, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just, like I know there was, said about concerns about, with Canadianized names and nationalities and that kind of thing in this thing. But from equality, for me, as a hiring resource manager, is simply like the voice, not necessarily seeing the person, although you will, is looking at everybody in an equal way, and making sure that their voice is heard in terms of inclusion. And in terms of the diversity is, everybody brings a different perspective to the table with regard to what they can produce on a project. And so it means for me having that say of what do you think about this thing, and making sure that the voices are heard. So I just wanted to say that there is, when it comes down to Dialog, and we can't speak for other architectural firms, we certainly, we just, Crystal and I just came from a 1-hour session of equality, diversion, and inclusion, a panel discussion of over 230 people, and we're a firm of over 500 people, so almost half of our people participated in this 1-hour session. Right across from Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and San Francisco, where our studios are. So it's an important piece of what Dialog speaks about. And so that's about all I can add to this at this moment.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David and Crystal. We can move over to our next question here. How do you measure or track a successful culture of EDI? And how is your workplace building an equitable, diverse, and inclusive culture? Maybe we can start. And John Partington, I included you in this question, more so to speak about a SAIT perspective and to talk a little bit more and elaborate more of your office and the work that you're doing there. So once again, we can start with John Partington and then move over to Clark and Dialog, Clark Builders and Dialog.
Yeah, this is quite a question. This is not an easy thing to do. It's quite complex. There's different angles that you can come at in terms of trying to measure if you know the things you're doing are actually having the impacts you want. The tricky part about all of this is a lot of these impacts are on a long-term scale. You can identify quick wins and changes in certain behaviors, but for the majority of the time, you have to look at a longer kind of cycle in order to see the changes you want to see. So for some people who want an instantaneous change, that's going to be difficult for them. But you can measure several things. You can measure the experiences of belonging, safety, and discrimination for your employees and your students in something like a climate check survey, which is something we've done at SAIT. The next one is coming up in 2022. And you can start to see if the pain points that are on your campus or in your workplace are starting to improve or not, or maybe new pain points have emerged in a different way. So that's one way. From an HR point of view, you can look at the complaints, the formal complaints that people make through a union or otherwise. And you can start to see, okay, those complaints lessening from year to year, are they becoming worse? But in other ways as well, I mean, if you're doing a training opportunity, you can ask people about their level of confidence with practicing and promoting and really embodying, the values of EDI in their own way. That's another way you can kind of come at this. So all of those things we're doing at SAIT. But as I say, I mean, it's hard to quantify a feeling. So you come up with different ways and triangulate a number of different points in order to really understand what's going on over a longer time period, I'm afraid. So that's some of the ways we're doing it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. Over to Clark Builders.
Brad, why don't you lead off this time, and I'll
Sounds
add
good.
anything additional.
So I think that, you know, probably at the core of this, it's about intention and operating with very deliberate intention that actually drives a continued awareness. For us, you know, we have succession planning that we go through every year, and actually bringing this into those conversations and making sure that's a part of the discussion. You know, there's an element of responsibility that falls to us as leaders to really continue to educate and heighten the awareness, whether it's through, we have anti-racism training, we have unconscious bias training. There are a number of things we've initiated in the last year and a half to continue to drive that awareness. We have employee resource groups that John probably can speak to better than I can. And then we have Indigenous Relations Working Committee. We have all kinds of different connection points to this to continue to drive the awareness. You know, in terms of how do we measure, there are actually software platforms that are out there that we're continuing to investigate. One of them is NISTOLink, which is largely around Indigenous and what's the real return, not only financial, but return to the societal impact. There's diversity.me. So we're continuing to explore what might apply best in our business. But part of this is measuring. So we need to measure year over year improvements and then speak to those to the business, how we're continuing to promote a diverse workforce, and allows us to make those adjustments and improvements as we go. You know, recently, as I took on my new role in the last year and a half, my successor was Kim Connell, that brought a different perspective to our executive leadership team. So it's really about how do we continue to do this with intention. John, I'll let you sort of round out the edges of that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brad. I think you covered most of the points of where we're at and what we've been doing. Measurement is interesting, obviously. So Brad shared what we are measuring. Really just started with a self-identification survey as well across all those categories, optional, of course, voluntary to us to get a perspective on the communities and the cultures that are represented in our workforce. So that's been the initial action that we're taking to learn from that. We'd like to see how that extends. As a general contractor, it's really interesting. You know, we have our employees, but we have, you know, multitudes of other businesses on our job sites as well. So we're looking at how we can, you know, leverage our relationship with our trade partners, our sub-trades we refer to as trade partners, and really get a holistic view of the communities that are represented and on our projects. So that's one thing we're measuring. And then the second piece to the intangible feeling aspect that's hard to measure, those employee resource groups are really important to us, where those are the conversations and the feedback sessions on how we're doing in assessing and reviewing everything we're doing as a company to make sure through that lens of ED&I. And so we currently have a women in construction group. We have a BIPOC ERG as well. And we're launching 2 more ERGs this year for some other communities that have put the, you know, say we're underrepresented here. We'd like to use that ERG platform. So that's the second piece we're using to measure.
Great. Thank you very much, John Trapp. And we'll pass things over to Crystal and David.
Yeah, you bet. Measuring is tough. There's a lot, like John said, there's a long game for a lot of the things that a lot of the efforts. but there are a few ways to measure, and that's in turnover and why people are leaving, if people are leaving because of issues in the workplace. And then there's also, long game, like, for example, Dialog just introduced a parental leave for non-birthing parents and support for non-birthing parents to encourage those people to take time to go and bond with their child. So this is a long game where we'll see what the benefit of that is. And it was just introduced this year, but it is an exciting thing to measure right now where we are and where we'll be in, say, 5 years. There's been some interesting studies coming out of countries like Sweden, where it has been directly tied to pay equity. So, some of these are not going to happen overnight, but there are some things like the voluntary gathering of EDI stats and being able to measure those over a period of time, what our demographic looks like, and also being able to use that information in our recruitment efforts and our pipeline efforts and our retention efforts. So yeah, I mean, the measurement is difficult, but how we're building a workplace that is equitable, diverse, and inclusive, the parental leave is one of those examples. And as both David and I had mentioned, we had just come out of a quarterly forum for diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we talk about different topics 4 times a year. We share ideas, we share stories, we share resources, and those are posted, and it's a part of a conversation that's ongoing. It's not just a one and done meeting and everybody forgets about it. So that is an ongoing conversation. We also have, we don't have a lot of mandatory things at Dialog. We're a pretty relaxed culture, but we did introduce mandatory, and we said the word mandatory, which was like, everybody was, whoa, they're serious about this. We did introduce diversity, equity, inclusion training last year, and we did tell everybody that it was mandatory, and the intention is to start the conversation as soon as a new employee starts with us, that we start the tone, we set the tone, and we start the conversation from there. We also have community outreach programs where we're targeting disadvantaged youth and communities, and this is very future focused and very hard to measure right now, but it does have, it's specifically targeted towards increasing diversity in our disciplines. Women are still underrepresented in engineering, for example. And women in architecture are about 50% of the people coming out of the programs. But as you go up higher in leadership, there's less and less. And so, investigating some of the reasons why that's happening, investigating why more women aren't going into engineering and encouraging that. That takes some time, and our efforts can't be measured in a year or even 5 years. Sometimes we're in high schools, and we're talking to kids in high schools and influencing them. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at short-term things, but mostly long-term things when we're talking about diversity and equity.
Well, I think Crystal has pretty much covered it all. I would just like to echo that there is a movement within Dialog in terms of the workplace building equitable and diverse and inclusion culture. I think every firm has a particular culture, and when it comes down to that, we'd like to make sure that everybody is in fact walking the walk and making sure everybody has their opportunity to be part of that and not excluded in any way, shape, or fashion. And in terms of measurement, it's going to take time. And like I believe, as was said with Clark Builders, there's always improvements along the way, and we're welcoming people to come forward and say their piece so that we can address any issues that may arise.
Well, thank you very much for those answers. Really appreciate that. This question is specifically tailored for John Partington. I know, sometimes when we're talking to people at work, certain things can come up where you're kind of challenged or you're kind of called to action in a way to address something. And for someone that might not be, an assertive personality, that can be tough, right? Like it can be tough. And, there's this whole idea that, if you don't stand up and say something, if you're a bystander, you're also part of the issue, or you're not, taking an active role in helping. So for John Partington, what are some of the skills and strategies we can personally employ when we may encounter some of these challenging situations?
Sure. I mean, a challenging situation, as an example, would be a microaggression. That way you experience a small, very subtle instance of discrimination, usually by folks who don't realize it or that's not their intention. But unfortunately, those things accumulate over time if you hear it every day. And it's this idea of death by 1,000 cuts. So why don't I start with, if you are the person who makes a mistake, there is a model that I really like, which I can share. And that's called the CLAIM model, CLAIM. So let's say you unfortunately offend someone and you make a mistake in some way. For example, if you call them by the wrong pronoun and you didn't realize that they use a different one than you expected. The first thing that you should do is the C. So you should center yourself. That is to say, try and collect your emotions so that you don't respond in a defensive way. The second thing, the L, is to listen. You want to hear the way that you offended this person. The A is you want to acknowledge and apologize for that instance. The I is you want to inquire about how you can change and get it correct. So then you want to immediately, call them by the right pronoun after your apology. And then the M is you want to move forward. So the longer you linger in that moment, the more awkward it becomes for both of you. But moving forward is not just about ending that conversation. It's also about taking away the time to reflect and ensure you don't make that mistake the next time. So that's one model that works if you're the person who offends, which, I mean, inevitably it happens to all of us. Nobody's perfect, myself included. It's more tricky though if you're the person who endures or you receive the discrimination. That depends on many different factors, especially the context in which that is happening, the power dynamics that are at play, if it's between yourself and your supervisor, for example. In some instances, you might not feel safe or comfortable to address and call out the issue right there. So you have to kind of read the situation, know and understand yourself. And if you're confident enough and you have the safety to do that, you could call it out right then and there. Now, the other thing is, you might not feel comfortable doing that. The power dynamics, the context might not be there. So I would suggest turning to a trusted advisor in a student situation, an academic advisor, for example. We do have counseling services, these kinds of things, or a faculty member whom you share a close relationship with and ask for advice and share what happened. The other way as well is more the confidential route. I mean, for example, SAIT has the harassment and discrimination hotline that you can call or send a message to. Everything remains completely anonymous. You can say, I'm just reporting that this incident happened to me and you should be aware, or I'm reporting this and I want you to investigate in full detail the things that occurred and I'm looking for consequences for that individual. So when it happens to you, like I say, there's no framework I can offer. It really just depends on that specific situation and then the people who are involved.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And I think I should also flip this question over to the industry folks. I know I just kind of picked on you, John Partington, because this is your realm, but I would also like to flip it over to maybe some of the senior folks over at Clark Builders and Dialog and see what their perspectives are.
I feel like Dialog should take this. We've been stealing their thunder by starting, so I'd like to give them the opportunity.
Oh, well,
Crystal?
thanks.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah, I mean, I love everything that you said, John, and I was actually making notes because I hadn't heard it said that way before. What we've actually been talking about a lot here is how to be an ally. And not only an ally to people who may be from disadvantaged groups, but also an ally to the source. And one of the things that I say a lot actually is when we explain how a person might have offended, but when we do it from an emotional place, that person might stop listening, and then we lose our opportunity to educate the person. And that's something that I do a lot in HR, and it's not just from a diversity and equity and inclusion lens, but it's just something that you deal with in HR when you're dealing with people. When you approach things from an emotional place, people don't listen, and so when we approach it from an apologizing and then inquiring, how can I do better later, or how can I do better in future, we definitely get their attention, but also the hurt person hopefully is able to communicate that, how that person can do better in future. So it's really important, I think, to be an ally to each other and educate each other, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And we're all learning, yeah.
So I'll chime in there, and I'll share a story because I think that probably speaks to this particular category. And that, well, first of all, I'll say that it had to deal with a principal saying something that I heard, which I was right close to, and whatnot. I that principal, by the way, is no longer with the firm, but I took not offense, but I felt that it was that particular comment that was made was actually directed to me. And I can share that over the next 4 or 5 days, it really bothered me. It truly bothered me, and took my toll in terms with I was dealing with my family, my wife, and my kids. To the situation that I was very grumpy and not necessarily kind to them, which is not good for them. So I took the bull by the horns and went and approached this particular person in closed doors and said, "Hey, you said this particular thing to me. I felt that it was directed to me. So can we have a chat about that, so that we can clear up the air?" Fortunately, that particular person said, "No, that wasn't directed to you. Just a kind of a global comment." So I think some of those things need to be sometimes dealt with head on. When I hire people or interview people, one of the things that I say to them, that we're a very culturally driven firm. Your success is our success. You have every opportunity as anybody else to succeed in this thing, and it's up to you to do that way. There will be no roadblocks. So you have an opportunity to be to move up the chain of command. But the other thing I do say is that we also, have HR. If there's anything that somebody may have offended you or said something that really bothers you, you need to hit it head on. Whether that's talking to somebody, perhaps myself, and hopefully I'm not offending anybody, but or HR, and deal with those things head on. And I mean, sometimes it's a difficult thing to do, but I think that's important in terms of these are challenges. They're going to happen. I don't think anybody means. Hopefully nobody means any disarray to anybody. But if you take offense to the thing, you need to say something. And the other thing I'd say is that when you wake up in the morning, we want you to be happy and energized about the work that you're going to do that day. And if you're not, whatever's bothering you, we need to have a conversation, because you're not going to be productive. You're not going to get your work done in a timely manner, perhaps. So those kinds of things have to happen, so that everybody's comfortable in the workplace.
Right. And maybe the folks over at Clark can share their insights.
I think Brad and I are going to go back and forth here. So I'm happy to jump in. And yeah, not to reiterate too much, but I think stories are powerful. So being mindful of confidentiality, we just recently had an opportunity where individual on one of our job sites was courageous enough to come forward with what were characterized as microaggressions. And it was interesting how much courage that took, and how appreciative we were that this individual actually did come forward, and how uncomfortable they were to come forward earlier. You know, those microaggressions had built up over a period of time. And I can just acknowledge how certain communities have learned to live with that, you know, and not necessarily bring the item forward. When they did bring it forward, I really appreciated John sharing SAIT's approach on that claim, because I found that we actually applied claim without knowing what claim was, which is good. So, you know, we were learning, and there's just a strong tendency for defensiveness. You know, so, you know, I guess my learning, or our learning, had been, and we had enough wisdom through the training, was to notice defensiveness when something was brought forward. Maybe for those of you who are considering, how can I bring these things forward? You know, I think there's, I would say myself and even others in our organization would react, or had reacted defensively, until we'd gone through some more training to understand how we could and should react. That would be more responsive to these issues, and how we could be more of an ally and in supporting the change. So yeah, it's we take an accountable approach where we look in the mirror when one of those items, when a microaggression, for example, comes up. We listen and look in the mirror of how we participated introspectively. How, you know, instead of, you know, oh, that was out of our control. I could see, you know, even in this example, it would have been so easy to say, oh, that's a contract that's outside of our purview per se, and deflect. But instead, we took the approach of, we are a stakeholder and we're an influencer in this, and this is an opportunity to partner with that courageous individual and bring them into the fold, us looking introspectively, and then leading as their ally to go moving towards a learning or a solution that could benefit the whole. So yeah, that's kind of how we've been approaching it. And I would say it's we're seeing it now in action, which is great, in that we can action things, and hopefully that generates more confidence of the people and communities that are fearful of bringing something forward. Our actions, we think, will speak very louder than our words in that regard.
I would just add to what John said, in terms of, this is about feeling safe and having access, safe access. And one of the ways to do that is, if you're not comfortable dealing with it directly with the individual, is thinking in terms of who do you trust that will hear it as intended. There's a Covey habit, seek first to understand. If you actually believe that the individual will seek first to understand, that's a great access point for you to look at.
Right. Perfect. Thank you very much, Brad and John. And this question is for Anne Tran. How can students leverage their diverse backgrounds and experiences to stand out in the application process? And I'd love your insights more from the Career Advancement Services Office.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also conscious of time, so I'll try to keep my answers brief. But if any students here want to discuss this further, I do encourage you to book an appointment or reach out to me via email. I'll put that in the chat box in a moment here. But yeah, in terms of leveraging diverse backgrounds and experiences, I think the work needs to be done even before you put pen to paper. Really just, don't undervalue the experiences that you've maybe had. If you've come here from a different country, I often work with, international students that feel like, well, their experience in their home country is maybe less important because, you know, it's not Canadian experience. But that is absolutely valuable experience. I mean, we have become more globalized than ever, especially during this pandemic. And so really looking at that experience as an asset instead of a hindrance, because being able to communicate with people from different backgrounds, being able to adapt, is really important, you know, and give yourself a big pat on the back for making the move, you know, being part of a program at SAIT and that sort of thing. So those are all things that you should really think are going to be an asset. And then being in that frame of mind is definitely going to help you put together an application package that is going to help you stand out in the process. So, so certainly like still include experiences regardless of where they came from. It's all in how you sell that experience, right? As long as you can make it relatable. So if you worked in, let's say, Brazil, doing some work in construction, you know, think about how that is relatable to the jobs that you're applying to here. You still had to use your teamwork skills. You still had to use communication skills, albeit, you know, maybe it was in a different language, but those interpersonal skills are still there. And those are still skills that you have to offer the employer. So, you know, and, you know, being someone who's from a marketing communications background, I love to help students kind of put a spin on their experiences to make them relatable to the jobs they're applying for. So, so happy to work on a one-on-one basis if you want to book an appointment. But that's kind of in broad strokes, I guess, my answer to that question.
Thank you very much, Anne. Appreciate that. And this is our biggest question, I guess, of the panel, and what brought us all here together. So once again, the student who expressed some concerns about not having the Canadian Western name, what advice would you specifically tell to the student about how they can, I don't know, work their way through this? And maybe we can start with the folks at Clark.
Your turn, Brad, and then I'll add some dialogue. No pun intended.
So, you know, I can see how this would be a concern. So from a person that's been hiring for an awful long time, as much as we build a product, we're a people-based business, and the success of our business is driven by people. And my experience would say to speak to your strengths, and that's a little bit of what was just referenced by Anne. Speak to your strengths and your value. Focus on what you can control in terms of relatable experience and how you support the organizational goals. You know, for me, I always look for people that speak to character traits and core values that align with the organization. Addressing what you know with a focus on how you'll leverage it into successful outcomes. Who you are is far more important than what you know. If who you are doesn't fit, what you know doesn't matter, is what I would share. John?
Yeah, I'll try to add very briefly as well. I can really understand the concern from the students that brought this forward, Jose, and I think it was great prompting because I'll just own my own journey on that. During our unconscious bias training, you know, I went into that thinking I'd already moved through some of my biases and realized kind of almost around this subject through that process, the biases that I still held that were related to a name per se that, you know, obviously just initially, once you dig deep enough, it's like, oh, I made an initial judgment around that name that then maybe categorized, you know, I then categorized and separated from that person in the process. So, you know, that was just one piece, is leaders learning to acknowledge that. I would say the last year with the George Floyd events and a lot of the movement that has happened that is tragic, but also really, you know, amplifying the right direction for society and businesses to go. I would say now with learning and organizations, we are looking for those diverse cultures with their names and their authentic selves. So I think that my encouragement would be, I think in a way that might be an advantage now of something that very recently could have been perceived as a disadvantage, and that feeling of needing to Canadianize. So, but if you find there's employers that don't have a strong ED&I culture already, they may still have some of those biases. But I'm saying that there are companies and employers out there now that are catching up to that. So sorry, that was a little longer winded than I intended.
Well, thank you, John. And over to Dialog.
Do you want to start, Chris, or can I? Shall I?
Sure. Yeah, I
Go
can
ahead.
start.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's all really, really great advice, and a really good point there, John, with the recent events and possibly catapulting some of our knowledge and acceptance around this, which is a good thing coming out of a really bad situation. My advice would be to be yourself. And I know that there's a fear of putting your name on your resume, but the resume can be focused on what you know, and then in an interview, just being yourself. I do see a lot of people coming in and trying to be what they think we want them to be, and not nearly the same. But I'm originally from Newfoundland, and I had a very thick accent when I came to Alberta 20 years ago. And I wasn't taken seriously because I had this accent, and I got rid of it. I worked at mostly getting rid of it, and spoke in meetings in a way that I thought people wanted me to speak to take me serious, and that wasn't a good feeling. And over the last few years, I've realized that my value is more than my accent, so I would pass that along to anybody coming out of school. You don't have to change yourself. Actually, yourself is the best thing that you can offer to a company, and I hope that we, the collective we, the corporations and businesses of the world are rising to this challenge of looking for those diverse people and allowing them to come to work and be themselves so that they can contribute in a way that they only can. Some of the things that we're doing at Dialog, I hope, is helping contribute to that inclusive workplace. And I do have one story that I mentioned to David last week. Was we had an Asian male start with us, and when he came in, he told me his name was Stephen. I knew his name wasn't Stephen, and the partner that he was going to work with said, "What do your mom and dad call you?" And he said, "Xiao Wen." And he said, "Well, you shall be Xiao Wen, if that's the name that you like and it's the name that other people call you, let's call you that." And he immediately felt like he could be himself and a part of the team, and not be somebody else, or the expectation that he could be something that he's not. So he's still here and he's quite happy, and I'm hoping that is just one example of what we do, but I'm hoping that just perpetuates a more inclusive, not just Dialog, but all of us in all of our lives.
Yeah, that's a great story. I think that's one of the things that we should focus on is let people be who they are, because that's where they should be and most comfortable within the work environment. And I'll speak a little bit about hiring. I know that there is a concern about a westernized or Canadian name. I don't look at that when I see resumes. I look at the quality of work that a student would have, the portfolio, what can they bring to Dialog that is going to enhance their career and enhance our career. And I have a favorite saying: "Is your success is our success." And so we don't look in any way at that. There's some people say that their GPA is 4.0. I've had, again, going through experiences of hiring people, I've hired people who are 4.0 grade point averages, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they fit the culture and the work ethic. And so, one of the things that I specifically look at is who you are as a person. Where's your career path? What are your long-term aspirations and short-term aspirations, to the point that Brad had made, and John, about, what does it speak to our core values? And so those are the things we take into consideration. When it comes down to that, and we spoke a little bit about, in a prior session that I was involved with the Dialog people, that our EDI session we just had before this session, is that it came up about salary equity. And we're very much focused on making sure that there is equity in hiring, that your name doesn't, what your name is and your ethnic origin is not relevant in this exercise. What is relevant is what you bring to the table and the skills that you bring to the table and the quality of your work.
Great. Thank you very much, David. I think we could just wrap things up now. I know we're at 1:04, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank each one of our panelists for joining us today. I think I personally learned a whole lot, and just hearing, the stories that a lot of you have lived through, some of the initiatives that you're taking on, it definitely does give me, a reassurance knowing that there is a positive shift, it seems, in the industry, and things are going towards the right direction. Although there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, it does seem more positive. So thank you all. Maybe what I'll do is, if any students have any questions from the audience, they can email me directly, and then I can forward you any one of those questions if they do come up afterwards. So, because I know we're at 1:05, so everyone's got to get to the rest of their day. So thank you all very much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.